Hi, I'm Sky High Phoenix, a game developer and student at the University of Portsmouth, studying for a specialism in game design, and this is Semester in Review 2, another entry into my development diary. Now, similar to Semester in Review 1, I'm going to be looking at some of the modules. Now, this time there's probably going to be a bit more meat to the bone because we've got assessments that have gone in, and sort of have a look back at what's been going on since January, and sort of seeing where some of the pressure points were and some of the things learned. So, first of all, starting with game development. Similar to Semester in Review 1, Global Game Jam and Game Jam 4 have their own videos. Uh, for more detail, I would recommend going and watching them. However, to give a bit of an overview, this is where I really sort of get into my designer game, where I'm really looking at mechanics, concept art, documenting things, particularly in Game Jam 4, and sort of starting to get the idea of, no, this is what it means to work in a group. We can actually push stuff out. Now, Global Game Jam also does have some light project managery stuff, but the main thing here is comparing this to where I was at the start of the year, and even at the start of the Global Game Jam, or the Global Game Jam, I should say, to give it its official title. The sort of designer elements have improved. Far more understanding of the systems design, knowing where that needs to be, sort of how many iterations that needs, starting to understand, okay, no, you actually have to go back and look at some of the designs and remake them a lot more than you think. But also just the thing of, this is how you work with a team. This is how you make sure everything's documented. This is how you make sure that information is communicated. And really upping the game on that one for these two. I mean, Global Game Jam, I call a success by my level in terms of the game that we got submitted. And the assessment for Game Jam 4 is technically not in yet because we have an extension for our project group on that one, which overruns when the deadline for this module for Design Studio and these videos is. So, not going to say anything definitive about that one like I have in the similar to how I've done in the video, how I've sort of said this is what we have and this is the expectation, but that goes in later this week on our schedule. But overall, game development, big jump up from semester 1, and more info, go watch the videos specifically on each of these. Then we get to turn to the companion module again, Design Studio. So, first of all, there's a lot more theory to Design Studio this time round than in semester 1, just partially due to how the lectures have been scheduled and due to the content of those lectures, where we don't have the World's Vegas brief assignment this time round. Instead, it's far more to do with the design tests and the stories, where there's a couple practical tasks that have been done. So, for example, Twine and going and messing about there and getting involved on that, but also just creating some mechanics, for example, adding a D&D class. I mean, those were interesting tasks. I mean, it's kind of annoying because the number of lectures, just due to how timetabling has fallen this year, meant that we didn't get explicit lectures on those. I get the feeling the tasks would have stuck better had there been, for example, for the Twine stuff, a specific lecture talking about the stories in that sense. The design test, we had a decent enough lecture on it that, yes, I got a lot of that. Ultimately, the main point where that design test has come in a lot more has actually been in game development, where there's been a couple of mechanics that have been tested. Then, of course, you've got the other bits of theory, like the documentation, how to do that. Very useful. Should have been earlier in the year, in my opinion, but particularly helpful for Game Jam 4, and definitely sort of clicked with me, as those of you who've seen that Game Jam 4 video will have recognised by the fact of the nature of my documentation. And the ethics is actually quite an interesting subject, particularly in my perspective. Now, admittedly, as a Nebula subscriber, there's a couple of channels that I keep tabs on, for example, Legal, which cover this kind of stuff, particularly when it comes to, for example, copyright law and the legal elements around it. But then to see it from the industry perspective and understand, okay, this is sort of the ways that you can easily get tripped up by it. Useful, and also an interesting point for me. Then, of course, there's the assessment, the development diary and the devlog. that's what I'm recording at the moment, or at least the tail end of it. So you might have noticed there's a couple videos where I'm in this get-up, which I've recorded at the similar time, and you'll notice there's a batch that I recorded earlier in the year, like good couple months ago now, where I'm in a different get-up where I recorded 3 in a row, and now I'm recording a couple in a row here. Ultimately, I'm playing a risky game with this one because I'm probably going to go into the 48-hour extension just so that I can make sure that this video contains enough reference, or could reference, I should say, Game Jam 4's video, because we had our last meeting for that a couple days ago before our recording for that for the game dev module hand-in. So, in that sense, now that we have the game sort of in its finalized state, I could talk about Game Jam 4, which allowed me to make that video, which allows me to record this video, and then I've still got one more to record after this for a year in review, namely the one which is going to get marked by lecturers, because I'm currently well over the time limit, given that we're allowed 15 minutes, and that is pretty much every video on its own so far, at the short end. However, design studio overall for TV2, I mean, in a sense, it's been there, it's been useful, but particularly because of how the timetable's fallen, it hasn't been in the recent month and a half as of recording. Kind of fell off out of the sort of immediate relevancy, despite the skills still being there. But then again, the devlog has brought it back, and ultimately useful, engaging, though I think a lot of this is stuff that only really will get fully implemented, other than the design tests, probably next year when we're sort of making games, for example, for student enterprise where we have to pitch a game. That's probably where the stories comes in, and particularly when we get to documentation, knowing about what we're pitching at that point. Ultimately, though, successful. I at least think so from my own analysis. Going then to GDeco, staying on the design element of game development, there's been a lot of theory this time round. So we've gone from academic writing to all these different types of what games can be considered. Now, the academic writing and research, I hate to admit it, but I might have come around to APA's 7th edition compared to the citation models I was espousing at the start of the semester. Well done, Adam. You win this one. Or at least this argument. So, well done, Adam. You win this argument. However, then looking at all the theory of the games, this one has been interesting because there's a couple points here where, okay, it's very theory intensive, but then again, this module is just generally. But the way that some of this stuff links back to stuff that we've covered earlier, for example, play and how that works with interacting with games, is definitely, I mean, it's an interesting connection, and it's one which I can see why people would be interested. It was engaging enough for the lecture, but I also think that as a topic, it's an interesting one to put in that position, probably. But then again, that is probably because it's being mired slightly by the fact that it's compared with game worlds and games as culture, which are some of the most interesting ones in terms of actually constructing games, at least in my opinion. Now, of course, games as systems, games as narrative, that's probably what you'd also consider your sort of stereotypical prongs of the fork that you can go down as a designer, the idea of systems designers and narrative designers. However, just looking at them from that perspective as well, very useful, also interesting. However, that being said, the only thing I've really taken from this one to pitch to my research essay, which we had to do for the assessment here, was the sort of idea of how you treat your players in part of this, because I think it was in Games as Play there was a slide as well, such as make sure you treat your players well. I can't remember if that's the specific PowerPoint for that one, but it's definitely in one of these ones. But a lot of it plays more for the essay on the player psychology element of how players behave in response to certain elements of monetization. Probably not an academic subject that most people watching this are like hyper interested about, but sort of see, but for a research question where in the end I've gone for about balancing product viability and player behavior and engagement in live service games. For me, just happened to click, just happened to work. Honestly, the biggest pain about this essay has been getting it down to word count. I mean, how am I meant to get it within the 1200 plus minus 10%? I struggled so hard to get it down to 1320 words. So just in the range, but what I found out was this is a topic I could really get engrossed in. I probably could write something for my dissertation in third year if I'm still interested in it and get it up to that quality with this question. But ultimately, let's not get ahead of ourselves. I don't have the mark back for that. I've only submitted it recently. By that I mean a week and a bit ago for that essay. But of course there's also the pitch with it. I had some fun with that. I mean, having the lecturer being able to sort of take a break from all the stress of the standard university questions to actually get some good, actually how do I format this, how do I bring this up, what do I need to bring up into the high concept, what do I need, can I leave in the broader description for the pitch. It hints that I'm on the right track at least. But it's also been fun, sort of just coming up with a game concept. I mean, particularly because the design principles I was taking about were for live service games. I don't have the resources to do that yet. Maybe someday if I get down the pipeline to sort of the dream employment of Supercell and work on a live service game there, that's probably when it starts to come into question of, okay, I might actually now need to start using these. But until then, being able to just pitch a game where, okay, it's a light MOBA, multi-modes, but you're also getting a lot of lore in there which you don't necessarily have to write to the full extent. Just being able to engross into that and have that game work, it's just a nice piece of work, I think. And honestly, where a lot of people seem to be annoyed by this assessment, I have found it quite interesting and definitely engaging to work on. But then again, that may also be because of my Finnish heritage and the fact that most of the subject matter experts appear to be in one of the Finnish universities. Of course, we next move on to CSGO, similar as in the last semester in review. Now, this and 3D modeling both have artifacts as their main point to work on this semester. Now, technically CSGO had a couple more workshops, however, I decided to skip them because it's 6 marks out of the grade, and I already have the skills, I can demonstrate them in the artifact, and that time is better spent elsewhere, mainly on getting this artifact sorted and also in other modules where I need that attention more, and it's just nice to get one module out of the way. However, the artifact, I've essentially made a Pong-like system. It doesn't work perfectly, namely it doesn't run with the objects in the Unreal Engine world. However, the logic works and it runs. So, in that sense, it was good enough for most of the marks. It's just, okay, I could have gone and bug fixed the connection issue to the objects in the game world, but again, only a couple marks there. Made sense to sort of sacrifice that, I'm going to be honest, to focus on things like particularly 3D modeling and art skills to just get more work done there and get more marks overall, particularly since based on the numbers I was already getting should be an easy first. So ultimately, again, coming from the coding background, nothing too complex. If I really wanted to sink some time into this, I could probably make something far more complex, but it's enough to get the marks. Why overwork yourself when you've got 5 other modules to work on? Speaking of some of the other modules, it's art skills with, first of all, some character pre-production work, because that is the basis of Portfolio 2. So, learning how to draw characters and sort of creating some of the backstory and showing it through the particular piece of art you're working on. Now, this was definitely more difficult to sort of get the full implementation of than the technical fundamentals from semester 1. But you'd expect it to. This is a far more advanced application of those than just use a technique. Now, ultimately this, as I say, culminates in Portfolio 2, for which I have ended up making these 2 pieces. Now, there's some more that words than I'll put here that I put into my actual submission in terms of the reflection, but you can see the two digital pieces. I mean, they're good enough. They use a lot of colour that I wouldn't be able to get from the hand drawing it with pencil to paper. But even though, because the digital, as much as I have a tablet from which I use to draw this one, as in, tablet's probably the wrong word, but one of those pen tablets that you can connect into your PC. I use that for this. Admittedly, I'm relatively new to that technology, but I've had one lying around for a bit over a year now, so it's good to actually get to actually use it. Ultimately, communicates a lot of the vibe I'm going for, just doesn't do it perfectly. But then, especially when you compare it to some of the stuff up top here, namely the hand-drawn sketches that I've done as part of the pre-production pipeline. Now, this isn't all of the sketches, this is just some of the ones that are later down the line, but you can see particularly when you compare, for example, the environment here to environment 4, or version 4, so bottom right of the environment pencil to paper ones, it doesn't quite... The pencil version just gives more of that sense of it from the texture perspective, whilst the digital ones give more colour. And ultimately, the only reason I've really gone for the digital one is because I need that control over colour. Then you have a look at some of the character art. Now, anatomy isn't my strong point, wasn't in the first portfolio, but tried a couple of things out, got it to a situation where I can at least say that this worked well enough that I was happy to submit it. Yes, because of the way I've done it, there's also some stuff that I didn't get in. For example, Winter here was meant to have a hairpiece, so annoying from that perspective. But good enough that I thought it worked for my submission. Ultimately, still need to wait to see what I get back from it in terms of marks and feedback. But from the main thing here is, as a designer, I don't necessarily expect to be working digitally all the time. And I think it is showing for good reason, unless I want to get into some more art as a hobby, or as a bit of side hustle onto the design stuff. But keeping the sort of pencil to paper version, at least that seems to be still up to the high enough quality that I can at least get a basic version of concept art that I can give to artists to develop further. And honestly, for me, that's good enough for what I'm aiming for, and I'm happy with it, even though technically a lot of improvement possible here. Then we get on to 3D modeling. Now, this one has been moved to the end of the pack, unlike in semester 1, because, well, the two things I've got to talk about are the artifact and the exam. I'll start with the exam first, because it means I stay on this slide. It's been a pretty similar experience to the exam from semester 1 for CSGO. Namely, it's been a relatively simple affair, at least from what I have now. I haven't got the marks back yet. I may be eating these words in a couple weeks when that is confirmed. However, it seemed relatively calm, nice and simple. Yes, the theory is there. I mean, it's also relatively simple theory when you think about it, or at least from what I think it was, and I feel relatively confident about it. Theory, fine, but then again, my existing skill set before coming to university has been as a theoretician, or a theoretic, or the strength in theory. So, again, that's kind of expected. What I didn't expect, however, is how I did on the artifact. And you'll notice, at least down here, it should hopefully start playing when I move to the next slide, so keep an eye on it. Yeah. This is what I made. How? I have no idea. But it looks good. And the only real issue is how badly optimized it is. As you can see, 3.7 million polys. Yeah, even my computer decided to have a bit of a hissy fit at trying to render the whole animation that I had to reduce in quality to what you see here. However, ultimately, I've surprised myself with how well this has gone. I mean, editing poly, I mentioned in the semester 1 video, somehow I was less confident with that than NURBS, but after playing around with it enough for this project, okay, something clicked, and it now just works. And honestly, this is the kind of improvement that I don't even expect from myself, because something has gone so right here that I've been able to make this and it looks as it's supposed to. If you want the reference point for what this is meant to model, it is a theme park ride at Linnanmäki, Finland called Mustekala. Now, admittedly, had I had not put 3.7 million polys into this, the idea was initially to make it animated as if the ride was in operation, but yeah, that kind of would have blown up, I think, any PC that anyone at the university would have had. So ultimately, again, it's an optimization game, but for where I came into this module, coming in with zero modeling experience, to making this in a year, is the thing that's probably impressed me the most, and is definitely, I think, the biggest testament to what I've learnt in terms of module-wise and what's possible. Overall, though, it's been a bit of a weird semester because the number of lectures has gone down, namely FOMOD and CSGO. There was only a couple lectures at the start of the semester, and then it's been all support sessions and drop-ins for the artifact since then. But then other modules like GDeco have just kept going, and then of course Design Studio being just unfortunately timetabled to miss out on a lot of stuff. It's been a weird one. But it's been good. And from a lot of the assessments I put in, I'm least happy where I am. And in terms of the progress I've made from where I came from the start of the year. Am I a perfect developer? No. That's what the rest of university and the professional experience is for. However, what I've done this year is definitely, at least in this semester, is I've taken a lot of the things that I've gone from knowing in theory to, or not knowing at all to, well, actually in this case for semester 2, it's been knowing in theory from semester 1 or from existing knowledge, and just being able to apply it. Now, admittedly, CSGO, as I say, could have been more complex, based on even my existing understanding, but again, that's the other thing of this. An optimization game against what I'm doing, because I poured more time into 3D modeling, art skills, and mainly the game development modules this semester, and each of them seem to have been paying off. In that sense, it's been good. Still more to take forward into second year, but semester 2 has been a fun one. And ultimately, there's only one more video for this series, and it's the year in review, and I'll see you there.